Hi, friends. I'm Chelsea Grayson coming to you once again from the Office of the CEO. This is my show where I can help you be more successful in your current career, and I can also help you successfully transition to a new career. Today, I wanted to give you my quick take on some of the ways that I think the COVID-19 crisis and the ensuing economic crisis are going to impact the retail industry. I'll go over a few of those impacts today, and then I'll save a couple more for some additional episodes in the future as we continue to see how the crisis plays itself out. So let's get started. So, number one, I think it's fairly obvious that there's going to be a turbocharged migration from brick and mortar sales to e commerce sales. I think that the way that this will start to play out in real time is that many stores aren't going to carry inventory in the same way that they previously did. So it might be that many stores move to the bonobos model where they don't carry actual inventory in the store, they just carry size samples so that people can take a look at the size sample, figure out which one they want, and order their clothes from an iPad in the store. And in this way, you get less clothes that ultimately are going to be sold being touched by multiple customers. But I actually think that most retailers that have a brick and mortar presence, including bonobos, are no longer going to even carry just size samples. I think that many customers are not going to want to try on clothes or sample merchandise that other people tried on already or handled. So I think that actually we might move to completely inventory-less stores, so no inventory, which means that those retailers who continue to maintain a brick and mortar presence are going to have to invest in AI generated technology, for example, that allows customers to stand in front of AI generated mirrors and try different things on virtually. That technology exists already, actually, but it's quite expensive. And I think that a lot of customers, some customers are going to have the ability and the finances to set that sort of virtual or AI technology up at home, one way or the other. Some of them are already doing that, so that the customers who continue to come into stores to experience that technology are going to be fewer and far between. They are going to be the customers who can't afford to have that technology at home where they can virtually try on clothes, and therefore maybe the customers that don't have such deep wallets and might not be able to generate as much revenue for the stores. I think that another thing stores are going to have to particularly focus on is the idea that customers aren't going to want to go into dressing rooms that weren't immediately previously sanitized, so that when one customer leaves a dressing room, a fitting room, then the next customer is going to want it to be sanitized before they go in to try on their apparel. That's going to be extremely expensive for stores to maintain. There's a lot of labor that's involved in there. There's a lot of training, and some of the sales professionals are not going to want to take up that additional burden. So they might have to hire additional janitorial services to take care of that kind of stuff. And that's going to add a lot of additional time in between how often customers, to the extent there's things to try on in the store, are going to be able to try things on, because you're going to have to stagger the times, because there's going to have to be time taken out of the schedule to sanitize those dressing rooms. And talking about staggering, stores are, whether because they're going to want to do this or whether because there will be city ordinances in effect requiring this, stores will be staggering entrance of their customers. So at any given time, they will reduce the number of customers inflowing into the stores by around 50%, is what the current estimation is. Again, that might be required by mandate, and sometimes it just might be what the customers want and what the stores are going to do in their stores. So that means that you're going to reduce your daily revenue by at least 50% because you won't be able to let as many people in the stores. So all of these options and all of these methods of dealing with brick and mortar in a post COVID-19 world are going to be incredibly expensive and very labor intensive for retailers. So most retailers, if they can, are going to migrate predominantly the majority, if not just much of their business, to their e-commerce sites. So number two, many department store chains are going to just simply fall away. Department stores were already in trouble, as many of you know who follow the retail industry, because they were having trouble keeping up with their shoppers' changing tastes. And they were already investing in methods to win back those customers. But many are not going to survive having their brick and mortar locations closed for such an extended period of time. The estimate is that most department stores can only withstand about 4 to 7 months at the outside with zero brick and mortar sales. So the ones that do survive are going to be the ones that were already strengthening and improving their e-com businesses and making it more of an omnipresence channel. So e-com normally only accounts for about 25% of a department store's overall sales, and it's predicted that in a post-COVID-19 world, that number is going to go up to 50%. So about 50% of a department store chain's sales are now going to have to happen online. And that's going to be a problem for a lot of department store chains because, as any retailer, not just a department store, will tell you, the margins are much, much, much higher when you're dealing with brick and mortar sales. When you go over and start talking about e-commerce sales, the margins shrink. They get a lot smaller typically. If you're talking about a traditional retailer that started out with brick and mortar presence. And the reason is because there's all sorts of shipping and other logistical costs that are built in when you're talking about e-com sales. And a lot of these costs are actually sucked up by the retailer themselves because that's what the customers demand in terms of free shipping and handling, et cetera, et cetera. So the margins shrink quite a bit when you're talking about e-com sales. And so that's going to be a big problem if your sales online normally only accounted for 25% of your sales, and now they're going to account for 50% of your sales. You better squeeze the heck out of those margins. So department stores that emerge from COVID-19 successfully are going to be the ones who not only have a strong e-com platform, but have figured out how to squeeze the most margin out of sales on that platform. Nordstrom is a really good example, just to pick one out, because they already have a relatively small brick and mortar footprint compared to the other big department store chains like the Macy's of the world. They only have about 380 stores in their fleet right now. And they've been investing for years now in streamlining their e-commerce platform. So they ought to do pretty well. Kohl's is also another really interesting example of a department store chain that I think is likely to survive and thrive after COVID-19. So they've been doing a lot of work over the past couple of years to subdivide their bigger stores so that they can sublease to grocery operations or gyms, for example. So, and then their newer locations, they're actually taking much smaller footprints. So their lease payments aren't as high. And they've shifted a lot of the business that used to happen in store to online. And they've reduced their cost by shipping from stores. In other words, if you place an order online, a lot of times that order is going to arrive to you having been shipped from a store. So you can use each of your stores as a mini distribution center. You're actually saving a lot of money in the long run because you're shipping from stores that are usually much closer to the customer that ordered it instead of from, normally you'd ship from a big distribution center in the middle of the country. And it costs a lot to send to the coasts, for example. If you're sending out from the stores that you've got in local locations anyways, that's a lot cheaper. And also, you don't have to pay big lease payments for big distribution centers anymore if you just have a bunch of localized distribution centers. Plus, Kohl's has a really lucrative deal, as most of you guys are aware of, with Amazon, where each of their stores acts as an Amazon return center. That has been a boon for Kohl's business because it drives traffic into Kohl's and therefore it drives sales ultimately. So Kohl's is probably going to come out of this pretty well in terms of department store chains. So the third impact I wanted to talk to you guys about that is going to be felt through the retail segment from COVID-19 and the economic crisis is that retailers that Normally they go into bankruptcy, and lots of retailers go into bankruptcy. You've heard of the retail apocalypse. It's been going on for years. But retailers normally, when they go into bankruptcy, they can follow through with a plan of reorganization. In other words, they can restructure their operations and emerge successfully and continue to operate. And you know, all sorts of retailers who have been through even a couple of bankruptcies and continue to operate successfully to this day. How do they normally do that? Well, in their brick and mortar locations, they have those big liquidation sales where you see the signs in the windows and it's 70% off. And they can generate a lot of cash in that way, in a really quick way, through during their bankruptcy, and they can fund their plan of reorganization and they can emerge successfully. Well, guess what's not happening right now? Any brick and mortar sales at all, let alone big liquidation sales. So a lot of the companies, a lot of the retailers that have filed and that are going to file during this crisis aren't going to have that sort of cash available to them. So instead of restructuring, reorganizing, and emerging successfully, they're simply just going to fall away. They won't exist anymore. They'll have to sell off in pieces. That is going to affect vendors, creditors, all sorts of other third parties up and down the supply chain. And that's going to have a significant trickle through effect to the rest of the economy outside of just the retail segment. So that is going to be a huge ripple throughout the whole economy, just emanating just strictly from the retail segment. So, number four, I wanted to talk to you guys about the sort of consolidations that I think we're going to see. And I actually talked about this a little bit in a previous episode. So, the winners from the COVID-19 and economic crisis are going to win really big. They're not just going to emerge, they're going to win really big. Because they're going to do all sorts of mergers and acquisitions activity. They're going to be able to buy all sorts of things on the cheap. They're going to find all sorts of bargains. And there's a really good example in terms of what I think is going to happen, which involves Amazon and Kohl's. So I referred a little bit earlier to the deal that Kohl's has with Amazon, where Kohl's locations act as Amazon return centers, right? Well, as Kohl's might need to sell some of its assets to generate cash to continue to fund its operations, one thing that it might consider doing is getting out of or trying to assign or sell some of its real estate leases to get out of some of its bigger locations or some of its less profitable locations. Well, guess who is going to want to step into some of those or maybe all of those leases? Amazon. Amazon is already now very familiar with the geography surrounding each of those locations. They're very familiar with the customers. They're very familiar with the customer patterns, right? They'll be able to cherry pick if Kohl's decides to put some of those leases out for sale. And Amazon is going to love to buy these leases or assume these leases from Kohl's because it needs to continue to compete with Walmart in terms of brick and mortar presence. Right now, believe it or not, Amazon actually lags way behind Walmart in one significant way, and that's brick and mortar presence. So Amazon has about 300 locations, and in order to really effectively compete with Walmart on a brick and mortar level, it's got to ramp up to about 2,000 brick and mortar locations. And remember, Walmart and Amazon are probably two of the companies in just a handful of companies that are going to continue to thrive in a brick and mortar experience. So I think there's going to be some consolidation in terms of Amazon buying up a whole bunch of Kohl's leases to make up the gap that it has in respect of Walmart's brick and mortar presence. So the final point that I wanted to go over with you guys today might be a little bit unexpected. So you might already predict that some of the dollar stores and the other discount chains, the value retailers like the Targets of the world, are going to thrive in a post-COVID-19 environment for all the obvious reasons. But I've been talking to people, and a lot of us believe that at the very other end of the spectrum, the uber luxury end of the spectrum, right? The LVMHs of the world, the Chanels of the world, there will be tremendous success in that universe. And that's because true luxury retailers, like the ones I've mentioned and others, they have a regular clientele that is not likely to be significantly impacted by the economic turndown. I mean, sure, they're going to see their stock portfolios decline just a little bit. But for the most part, their day to day spending habits and their day to day lifestyles are really not going to change or be significantly impacted by the economic turndown. They might be a little bit more frugal than they normally are, but generally speaking, their wealth is protected. It is not as vulnerable as the common American's pocketbook is going to be. So the wealth is so entrenched that they're going to continue to buy from these luxury retailers, and the sales won't drop as precipitously as sales are going to drop in the middle and lower tiers before you get down to the discounters and the dollar stores. That said, we do think that luxury retailers will have to migrate much more significantly to online sales. And this will be a first for a lot of them if you're talking about any significant migration to online sales, because luxury retailers have notoriously and historically declined to have any sort of big e-com presence because they feel that it denigrates the luxury, the halo around their brand. But they're going to have to do it for all the reasons that I talked about earlier in terms of what's changing from a brick and mortar perspective, because even the luxury customer might not want to wander into the stores as much as they used to. Also, one other advantage that luxury retailers have versus the other retailers is that they can leverage their ability to provide personal shoppers and other sorts of personal shopping, unique experiences to their customers in ways that other retailers are just not going to be able to ramp up on in time and aren't going to be able to invest in time to compete with the luxury retailers. So there you have it. Those are some of my quick thoughts on what I think the impact will be in the retail segment from the COVID-19 and economic crisis. I do have some other thoughts, but I didn't want to overload them in this episode, so I'll do them in a next episode. And I will see you guys next time in from the office of the CEO.